This video will help you get to know some of the recent revisions to the student growth rubrics for the outputs in student growth 6.2 and 3.2. They're involved with our statewide teacher evaluation system. My name is Mark Gardner, and I'm a practicing English teacher at Hayes Freedom High School in the Camas School District, and I'm a member of the Camas Education Association. I also work with OSPI as co-lead for the Marzano TPEP framework for the entire state. This video is going to be focusing on what are the changes for 3.2 and 6.2 in our student growth goal rubrics. If you have some questions about why we're making these changes right now or how these changes might be implemented in your district or your building, there are some additional resources on the OSPI website that I encourage you to check out. Let's start by reminding ourselves about the big picture. So we've always, with our student growth teacher evaluation, there's been student growth 3.1, 6.1, and 8.1, which are about the goals that we create and how we collaborate to set goals for our students. Those are often referred to as the inputs. Those are the things that we put into our system, so to speak. This video is going to be focusing on 3.2 and 6.2, which is the output, how we evaluate the outcomes of those goals that we set and put into practice in our classrooms. The original output rubrics, hopefully, are familiar for our small group student growth goal setting and for our whole class or whole cohort student growth goal setting. Proficiency was literally the exact same language. Multiple sources of growth or achievement data from at least 2 points in time show clear evidence of growth for most students. Over the last 10 years, as this policy language, these rubric language has been in effect, we've learned a lot, and that has led to some reflection at the statewide level and at the leadership level about why we even do student growth. Why do we set goals? Do we set goals to produce data, or do we set goals to improve teaching and learning? And the present iteration of the student growth goal setting rubrics are really just verifying that data exists. But that's that first answer to the question. Do we set goals to produce data? We really shouldn't be. That's kind of a waste of everybody's time. We need to be setting student growth goals to improve our teaching, our instruction, and our student learning. And so really, when we think about what that means, how do we use the data? And so that is kind of the crux of the transition and the revision to these output point two student growth goal rubrics. So let's take a closer look at what the language actually says. To really understand the revisions that have taken place, we're going to be focusing in on the descriptions for proficient. And so if you're interested in looking at basic or distinguished, we recognize that rubrics are gradation. So by focusing on proficient, which is really kind of our target, that'll help you understand all the other levels as well. And unlike the previous iteration of our point two rubrics, the language for 3.2 and 6.2 is not verbatim the same. There are some minor changes. It is largely similar, though, and that's where we're going to start. We're going to look at the language that's in common between the new 3.2 and 6.2, and that's right here at the top, these first three sections. So let's zoom in on that to really understand that language. So there's some resources with the OSPI's communications that define some of those terms that are in bold. So the first three, critical standard, cognitive engagement, emotional engagement, those are discussed in the video about the goal setting. So if you're curious about those, that other video will help answer those questions. But when we think about the outputs, part of evaluating the progress toward a student growth goal is looking at formative and summative assessment. And so OSPI has provided some guidance to help make sure that we have kind of common understanding of what that means. And so obviously with summative assessment, it's about students demonstrating the sum of their learning, and that can look many different ways: performance assessments, project-based learning, whatever opportunities that might look like. But this also calls out the need for formative assessment so that teachers can adjust their instruction. Quality growth goals will enable a teacher to do formative assessment along the way so that we can adjust instruction to meet the needs of our students and learners. Good formative assessment also helps students understand what they can do to adjust their own strategies and how they demonstrate and develop their skills. In addition, for maximum learning benefit, students are receiving feedback. Feedback, research says over and over again, assessment is no good unless it functions as feedback for students to really support their growth, as opposed to just labeling with a score or a grade. There's also, for proficiency in the point twos, evidence of student engagement in the assessment progress. That might mean that the students have been actually involved in determining or creating the criteria for evaluating their performance. That's not always possible, depending on what the assessment tool might be. But no matter what, there's developmentally appropriate ways at all levels to provide students the opportunity to assess and reflect upon their own work or the work of their peers using that criteria. In this, they can also then monitor their own progress. So it's not just about point A and point B. That journey along the way, kids have the opportunity to understand their own growth, make adjustments on their own so that they can really take ownership of their learning as they move toward whatever goal you're working toward together. And then last, there's evidence of feedback from students, not just feedback from me as an instructor to my students, but also me soliciting feedback from my students on their experience of the learning. And so that invites their perceptions of the classroom environment, instruction, their own learning. It can be anonymous. In many cases, we know that that enables kids to feel more comfortable sharing their experiences and perceptions. And while I gather this information as an instructor, it should be more a part about my own reflection and self evaluation. And it doesn't necessarily have to be something that I hand over to my evaluator. I have the discretion about whether or not I share the actual data with my evaluator. But my evaluator will be listening for how have I used the feedback that I receive from my students in order to shape my practice and improve their student learning. So, what differentiates the student growth goal rubrics 3.2 and 6.2? We've already identified those elements that are common. When we look at the 3.2 subgroup student growth goal outcomes, part of the key here is that we reflect with our supervisor on the progress of individual students within the group. The whole point of differentiation in 3.2 is that we're examining individuals. Yes, we may have a subgroup, but that group is composed of individuals. And our goal is that individual student growth and considering and reflecting upon those individual kids. And it doesn't necessarily hinge on whether or not the students achieved the goal. We are being evaluated on what do we do with whatever information we get from this process. We're reflecting on why students did or did not make progress or what the next steps are. So this is us really using the information from student progress as opposed to just having data. Now, a lot of this shows up similarly in the 6.2 whole class or whole cohort student growth goal outcomes. So again, we're reflecting on the learning progress, but this time when we're looking at a whole cohort, we think of them kind of in three categories. The students who exceeded that learning goal, the students who met or were very, very close to meeting that learning goal, or students who have not yet met that learning goal. And then our reflection is, why did that outcome happen? Why did students achieve or exceed? Why are students not quite there yet? And it's not about how many of our kids made progress. It's about how do we analyze the information from our kids in order to use it to make instructional decisions. This really empowers us as teachers to not feel like we have to set goals that everybody can meet out of fear of not making our student growth goal requirement. This really focuses on how do we examine the data when we examine student growth in order to inform the work that we do with kids. Few things to remember. First off, reflection is intended to occur during learning focused conversations. It does not inherently need to be a Google form that I fill out or a narrative that I have to write and then turn in to my evaluator. It's really the intent of leadership at OSPI is that learning focused conversations between an evaluator and a classroom instructor is where a lot of this gets surfaced. It does not need to be in forms that I spend an hour filling out and then my evaluator adds to a stack. The conversation is really where a lot of this takes place, which ties to that second thing to remember. TPEP, whatever we want to call it, it should be a natural harvest of evidence from our practice. And that term natural harvest I stole from WEA training by Scott Poirier about what we just already do and how do we use that to examine our work. If we get to a place where doing TPEP feels like it's adding a ton of extra work, whether you're an evaluator or a teacher, we need to re-examine how we're implementing, because the intent is not that this is a whole nother job layered on top of our job. The intent is that this is an opportunity for us to examine the work we're already doing. And that might mean refining and improving our work, but it shouldn't mean a whole bunch of extra work. So this video gave you kind of an overview, hopefully, of the point twos, the outcomes of our student growth rubric revisions. If you have any questions or if you need additional resources, do remember that the OSPI website is the first place to go to try to find the documents, to find the guidance, to find definitions. to find the links to the policy and statute that drives this, because this is rooted in statewide legislation. And down there in the corner, of course, there is the contact information if you do have some pressing questions for your district. Continue doing the great work that you're doing with kids all across the state of Washington, and take advantage of this opportunity to use student growth and our focus on student growth to make sure that every kid in our state has the opportunity to access the education they deserve.